definitely not easy to get started.
No, that's what she said. Into helping Brandon prep his car. So I was going to help either way, but I felt like it was a good chance to give you guys a quick tutorial on how to prep smaller parts of your car for paint. So I am doing the 2 side mirrors, the handles, and the 3rd brake light for his Miata. So just prepping them out in 220, but it's nice to know what to do with those smaller parts rather than just an entire vehicle. So let's get to it. I apologize about the audio now. The guys are working and the swamp's going, so I can't do much about the audio. But, so the first step of prepping the smaller parts, you want to get all the tools you need, which I basically have a small flathead screwdriver and some needle nose pliers, basically anything small that can get into little areas for clips. So maybe like a pick could even work, but usually a flathead screwdriver is your best bet. Now I've got a few of the pieces I need. Some of the other ones have already been de-trimmed, but you've got your handle, 3rd brake light, and then the mirror. Starting with the mirror, it's actually got 3 little balls that it kind of clips onto. I'll show you guys once I get the mirror off. It's easier to explain once you're looking at it. You kind of want to turn the mirror all the way to one side, and then this top corner here. So you have to kind of pivot it all the way to one side so you can get your finger underneath, and then you can kind of just like pop them off the ball. Alright, so here is what the mirror looks like once it's off. So it's got these 3 little clipping that goes onto these 3 balls. And they are just little balls that it hooks up to or hooks onto. So again, you kind of just pivot it all the way to one side, and then you get it so you can, basically enough so you can get your finger underneath, and you kind of just slowly pop it off. Now here's the hard part. We have to get this black piece out, which has a bunch of clips on the inside. That's where your flathead is going to come into play. It's got these little slots on the inside, and that's where those clips are. So you kind of start on one side because it's technically got clips back to back. You start on one side and start popping off that clip, and then once you feel it kind of push out, which is not a very noticeable push, then you push onto the other side. So it's going to be very small, but it's not super easy. So kind of just pick a side. You want to push against it while you're also lifting the black piece up. Fortunately, I am not very good with clips, so we'll see if I can actually get it. The next step is you grab your Brandon. And unfortunately, I'm terrible with clips.
So yeah, this one, right? So this one you're gonna have to be pushing up on here?
I think that's the problem, is I'm not strong enough to push up while also pushing.
Okay, so I'm pushing.
Okay.
Do the other side.
I don't think I'm strong enough.
We almost got it.
Something wrong. You don't have to completely de-trim every single piece. It just depends on how much you, how much effort or how much you care to actually put into the paint job. Obviously, if you're going for car show quality, you want to de-trim every single piece. If you're going just for another color change, you probably don't have to de-trim every piece, just tape them off so you're not sanding the trim. I'm not 100% sure as to why Brandon's de-trimming his piece, because this is just his daily car, but I think it's more just so we can promote the adhesion of the paint. It's so we can guarantee that the paint definitely will stick.
Okay, so I got that one out. So next would be this one, which I did need the flathead.
Well, while he's doing that, I'm going to move on to the handle. So with the handle, you've got the spring, and then you've got this, which the spring and everything, this whole little contraption basically holds on this piece that stays to the car normally. Oh, cool. So mirror is now de-trimmed.
Bolts are on the ground. The mirror is almost broken.
All right. So you've got the spring side, and then you've got this little back end side, which this is fairly simple. Once you get it pushed up, you kind of are just pushing it past the curve. And there you are. Now that piece is out. So it's a little curvy piece. You can see it actually has, this is kind of like a hinge, and that's what it holds on to. So you kind of just are getting it past the curved part and getting it off the hinge. So fairly straightforward. Now this one, you want to undo the spring from this side. And that's pretty much all you have to do is just get the spring out. So the other one, oh, there we go. There we go. I got it to pop off. All right, and so now this piece can come apart. So spring goes to the side because obviously that doesn't need to be sanded or anything. But now you have this little tiny piece and the handle that's separate. If you guys can see, this car was plasti dipped before Brandon owned it, so that's a big reason why we are going to clean it with the wax and grease remover. Another reason that you want to clean your parts with wax and grease remover before sanding is because you don't want to sand any of the dirt into the pieces. Any of the grease, oil, any of that stuff, because that's going to make it harder or make the paint not adhere to the part, and then it'll just start chipping off. You know, it doesn't last as long. So you want to get them as clean as possible, and then you want to sand them so that way the paint actually gets into the grooves of the sanding and it's not just sitting on top of, say, for instance, if you were to paint this. Basically it would just come off. But I have to clean all the pieces so I can get the plasti dip, all the dirt, grease, all that other stuff off. So I'm going to go wash my hands, put some gloves on, and that way I can actually clean them pretty thoroughly. So I'm gonna go do that really quick. I'll be right back. Now we're all gloved up, hands are clean and everything. Really quick, we are not gonna be de-trimming this anymore because it's pretty much everything is taken out of it besides the actual light lens itself. So you can take that off, but again, this isn't a car show quality car, so we don't care to. But I've got all my pieces that I'm going to go ahead and clean. Get your towels and everything. Again, wax and grease remover, and then you kind of just go at it. So I'm gonna clean these up really quick, and then we'll move on to the sanding portion. So all the cleaning is done of the parts. We're on to everyone's favorite part, which is the sanding portion. So because it's smaller parts, you want to get smaller blocks to sand with. So this, this will be for like the bigger portions on top of the mirrors. This will be kind of just like for flatter surfaces like their brake light. You don't really want to ever sand with just two fingers, like, sanding paper stuck to your hand, and with two fingers, because you're just doing the surface of your fingers, essentially. That's what you're actually sanding. So for the smaller parts, like for instance on the driver's side handle where it's got this little inner circle where the key would go in or the lock cylinder goes into, I'm going to have to use my fingers because a block, no matter how small, is not going to get in there very well, not compared to a finger. So that's a little bit different. The smaller parts, you can use your fingers for, but you mostly want to use the blocks to kind of have a more flatter surface, bigger surface of sanding, and it's solid rather than relying on your fingers to sand. So I'm sanding all of these parts in 220, which you can get 220 at O'Reilly, a bunch of different places, but basically with sanding, it's fairly straightforward. You're basically, you're doing more than scuffing the surface, but essentially you're scuffing the surface, and you're making it so that the paint will actually adhere to the pieces. Obviously, once you're done sanding, you do clean again because you don't want any of that sanding dust to get into your paint job. Again, it's very straightforward. You kind of just get your block, put the sanding paper on it, and kind of go from there. So I'm going to start with this mirror. It's a bigger surface, and you're kind of just going at it. Unfortunately, these pieces do have quite a bit of clear that is, basically peeling off, as you guys can see here. Not really sure why it wasn't adhered properly. It was plasti dipped over. I don't know if the clear was already failing before the plasti dip or not. So who knows how long the clear's been flaking off, but you're kind of just going at it with a sandpaper, doing your best to get that flaking clear off, but you don't want to go too hard with it. Kind of are just, again, basically scuffing the surface. so that the paint will go into those little grooves, and stick. So good thing is that the sandpaper is taking off chunks of the clear. Bad thing is you don't want to sand the clear into the other pieces or other parts. So with the clear, because it was flaking off and everything, you can see that there's kind of a bit of a rigid line or a ridge. You want to feather that in, so you want to try and make that as smooth as possible so that there is no ridge on it anymore, because otherwise you'll be able to tell once you paint over it that there is kind of a peak and next to it there isn't. So that's your whole goal. You're just trying to feather it out smoothly. Hopefully if you are prepping any of your parts, yours doesn't have this clear coming off, but if it does, you basically just want to feather that out and make it all nice and one flat solid surface. So I'm going to tackle this really quick, all of these parts, and then I'll be right back to show you guys some more. So pretty much the finish you want to have is like a matte finish or a not so shiny finish. If you have a light on the piece and you can see shininess, like the old paint, still shiny and stuff like that, that's what you don't want. You want it to have kind of a dull finish to it. It's basically what you're going for. So I finally got the 2 mirrors done, and then I'll be moving on to these guys. So these parts, again, I'm going to have to use more of my fingers on because they're so, I need to get into those little crevices and everything. So I'm going to have to use my finger to try and get into those areas because a block just won't do it. And once I get these guys done, there'll be the 3rd tail light and we'll move on to cleaning. So with ridges like this that are on like the handle, for instance, you don't want to go at it with a block because at that point you're sanding down the ridges. You want to keep the shape. It's kind of like keeping the body line on a car, for instance. You don't want to just go ham at it with a flat block. You want to go into the ridge and keep that, that ridge shape. So essentially you would take your sandpaper and your fingernail and kind of just get into the ridge. And you can see it knocking down the shininess, which is exactly what you want. And that way you keep the ridge shape, but you still knock down the shininess and make it so that the primer will actually stick to it. So that's kind of how you would shape a ridge. Yeah, even though it's a really subtle ridge, you still want to make sure you get into that little crevice because you want the paint to stick. When I was sanding this one down, it actually, chunks of paint kept coming off, and so I had to try and feather them in, but every time I went to go feather one spot, another huge chunk would come off. That just means the silver paint underneath the Plasti Dip wasn't adhered properly either, and we're pretty positive that was a factory, OEM color, so that just means at the factory they didn't do a very good job sanding before applying the paint because it's just coming off in chunks. It's another reason why the clear failed on the entire vehicle, is just because it wasn't laid down properly. And without it being laid down properly, it doesn't stick to the car. And over time, with the sun or just generally over time, it starts to wither away and kind of flake off. So you want to make sure that you're sanding all the areas you possibly can by any means necessary. That means using your fingernail and kind of just going at it. This is why prep work is kind of the most hated part of the paint process. It takes so long, you have to be very precise, and it's so dependent on the prep work that, even if you rush to get to the end, you're going to have another really bad paint job that you're going to have to redo in a couple of years. So you want to make sure that you're covering all your bases and getting everything properly prepped. That way your paint will properly adhere. So let's get back to it. I'm finally done sanding all of the little pieces. Normally with a bigger panel on a vehicle, that's what you would want to hit with the air so you get all the sand off. These aren't, it's not a ton of dust, so I'm just going to hit it with the towels and the wax and grease remover again. Make sure that most of the dust is completely gone off of it so that these are basically ready to go straight to the paint booth and get primered. Look at that magical wax and grease remover delivery. So I'm going to wipe these all off. Also, for more updates and possibly to see these actually get primered, I'm not sure if they're filming that or not, but more updates on the Miata itself, check out U-Wrench's channel, U-Wrench TV on YouTube. They've got tons of updates on Sarah's projects that they're doing, as well as our own personal projects. I occasionally appear in there, but it's just because I'm working, cleaning up the shop and stuff. So, but more updates on this NC, the build itself, and the paint work, check out U-Wrench TV on YouTube. But let's get to cleaning these parts. Okay, so we are now done completely wiping down all of the parts with grass and weeks remover. That's what I was gonna say.
Grass and weeks remover.
Now that we're done wiping down all the parts with the wax and grease remover, they are pretty much ready for primer. Fred will make sure to wipe them down probably about 2 or 3 more times with like the solvent-based wax and grease remover, the water-based, stuff like that. And because you just want it to be as clean as possible. At this point, I was just knocking off all of the leftover dust that happened. So that's pretty much it for prepping these smaller parts of a vehicle to be painted. It's just a lot more sanding, but in smaller crevices, and you want to make sure you get into every little nook and cranny. To promote paint adhesion a lot better, you want to make sure you get into all those areas so you're not having flaking off paint. So these are pretty much all ready to go. They just need to be primered and then sanded once again. Your paint job is only as good as your prep work, and if you look like me or worse, you know that you did your prep work well. Your entire station should be covered in sanding dust. But you want to just make sure that no shinies left over, it's all nice and dull and matte, and got some scuff marks on it. So that's it for the basic prep work on smaller vehicle parts. Please give me a like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what you guys think, and I will see you all next time. Bye!